Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Miller, the Executive Director here at May Center for Learning. Thanks so much for joining me today for this live stream. Today is a special day for May Center in that we have the opportunity to raise over $100,000 to support our school and the work that our nonprofit organization does. Uh, because we have three generous donors who are matching every dollar raised, your donation actually is tripled. So if you give us $100, we receive $300 thanks to our matchers. So I hope you'll consider giving once you learn a little bit more about our mission and what we do here. So May Center is a nonprofit. We work exclusively with kids who have learning disabilities or who have been unsuccessful in another more traditional environment. The kids we work with are smart, they are creative, they are full of potential, but they're often misunderstood in the settings that they've been in. And so we feel that it's our job to really find the key that will unlock their brilliance and help them reach their potential. And so it's a privilege and an honor to do that work every day. We work with kids through our school. We have a school that is early childhood through eighth grade. We work with kids who go to other schools through tutoring. We also have an evaluation center with two diagnosticians on staff who provide full diagnostic evaluations for kids who may have a learning disability. We also have a teacher training program that's quite robust, and we work with public schools all across the state, particularly in the science of teaching reading. So today I'm going to talk about a topic that is certainly an important topic in my household, but it's also a topic really for all of us as parents. Whether we have children who have any kind of learning difference or not, what we know is that executive functioning skills, the skills that are necessary for self-regulation and for supporting learning and success in the classroom and at home, are the very last skills to develop in any child's brain. In fact, brain scans show that the part of the brain that is responsible for executive function, this prefrontal cortex right here, is the very last part of the brain to develop. And even in typical brains, it is not fully developed until our mid-20s. And yet, in school, every day, we ask kids to do tasks that require a ton of executive function. And at home, as parents, we ask kids to do tasks that require a ton of executive function. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the development of executive functioning skills, and then really focus on how, as parents, we can support our children to maximize their executive functioning skills in our homes. So what is executive function? Well, Russell Barkley says this about executive function, and I have to say this is my favorite definition. Executive function is those self-directed actions, self-regulation, used to choose goals, to select, enact, and sustain actions across time toward those goals, typically in the context of others, and often using social and cultural means. Now, there's a lot there, but the reason I like it is, first of all, it really highlights the fact that executive functions are self-directed. They allow us to set goals and then motivate ourselves, right, to achieve those goals. They require an intense knowledge of the context that we're operating within. And those contexts shift. For children, for example, the context at school and the expectations at school in terms of self-regulation might look different than the context at home. Likewise, if a child has more than one home that they spend a lot of time in, oftentimes the context varies, right, depending on who's making the rules. And so a child must first understand the context they're in and then be able to self-regulate in order to achieve those goals. So EF skills include things like initiation, which is starting a task, focusing, so continuing to focus on the task once we begin and not losing interest, sustaining our effort and attention, Controlling our emotions and responding with an appropriate emotional reaction to the circumstances, and also inhibiting either emotional reactions or other behaviors that might get in the way of the context that one is in at the time. They involve our working memory. So, again, that's housed here in our prefrontal cortex, and that's the part of our brain that holds and manipulates information. So, one thing that we know about kids who have learning differences is that they might have a relative weakness in their working memory, in their ability to hold information. So, what does that mean, and how is that relevant to being a parent? Well, kids who can't hold as much in their working memory might not be able to remember multi-step directions. So it's time to get ready for school in the morning. People are rushing around. It's the same routine every day. And so as a parent, you say to your kid, all right, you need to get your shoes on, grab your backpack, get your lunchbox, and meet me at the door. And then you're at the door with all of your things ready to go, and where's the kid, right? And we find him down in his room with one shoe on and one shoe off playing Legos. And that's pretty maddening for a parent who needs to get to work. But what happened there? Well, most likely what happened there is that he heard the first direction and he began to complete that task, putting on his shoes. But then he got distracted by the Legos, something he really liked, and he lost those other pieces. His working memory was not able to hold those other pieces. And so, what we know about children, particularly who have learning differences, but again, this applies to so many kids, when we break down directions into one step at a time, they're much more likely to be successful at completing the tasks, and we are much more likely to not get as frustrated when they don't do what we ask. So, that's what our working memory does for us. It allows us to hold and manipulate information. Another executive functioning skill is organization. So this can show up in all kinds of ways. For some kids, this shows up in a lack of physical organization. So their room might be a mess all the time, and they might not seem bothered by that. Or these are the kids who, when we look in the backpack, it kind of looks like a small bomb exploded inside the backpack, right? That the papers don't seem to stay in the backpack or in the folders, and things are crumpled up and kind of all over the place. Nothing gets cleaned out. So those are examples of physical organization. But what we do know is that executive functioning skills can also relate to mental organization. And sometimes what we see in kids is that they might be real good at physical organization. They might have all of their papers in the right place. Their notebook might look beautiful. Their room might be very neatly organized. But mentally, they are not able to organize their thoughts and plan out, what should I do first? What should I do next? Then what, right? And so what ends up happening is this disorganization that manifests often as overwhelm. So these are kids who oftentimes might have a difficult time getting started or knowing what the next step in a multi-step project might be. These are kids also who might have difficulty organizing their feelings. And so even finding the words to express how they feel might be very difficult. And we might see behaviors arise that are actually the result of not being able to organize my thoughts and then express them through language, particularly related to emotional reaction. Another thing I want to point out, because it's something that certainly we see a lot at May Center, is kids who struggle with executive function skills might also struggle with social and mental flexibility. And so that oftentimes looks like a student or a child who, once they get an idea about how something's supposed to go in their mind, it's very, very difficult to shift when things don't go exactly as planned. And so their problem solving skills might be very underdeveloped in comparison to a lot of their intellectual skills. And so we might see a child who intellectually can engage with concepts, ideas, assignments that are quite advanced, but who might not have the emotional or cognitive flexibility to shift if something doesn't go as planned. So these are kids who oftentimes don't like things that are different or new, even if once they try them, they like them. Um, One time in our summer program, we had a boy who came in crying the day that we were supposed to have a celebration. It was the end of the summer program, and we were going to go to the movies, right? Which we all thought would be really a fun and exciting thing for the kids. But for this little boy, he came in crying, and I asked him what was wrong, and he said, "Well, what if I don't like the movie?" And so we really had to explicitly talk through, okay, well, what are your choices? If you don't like the movie, how can you make a choice? To either ask to leave, or maybe you could sit by the teacher, or maybe you could bring a book to look at in case the movie isn't interesting to you. So helping that child kind of think out and plan out some possible scenarios helped him to settle enough to actually be open to the new experience. Once he went to the movie, liked it, he had a great time. But it was getting over that hump that oftentimes we see. At our school, we use a curriculum that calls that state of mind rock brain. And I really like that. It's kind of like your brain gets stuck and you can't move beyond it to think of how to solve the problem yourself. I want to bring up a particular learning difference that's really relevant to executive function. What we know is that if a child has ADHD, they're almost always going to have some significant lags in their executive functioning development. In fact, the brain studies that they have been conducting for the last 20 years on kids who have ADHD demonstrates that there's actually up to a 30% lag in the development of executive functioning skills. So what that means is that a 12-year-old with ADHD is really functioning with the executive functioning skills of a 9-year-old. And again, this looks different in every human being, right? We're all different and unique. And it's rare that you find somebody who has weak executive functioning skills across the board. It's more often that you find a pattern of strengths and weaknesses. So certain things that are easier for that child, certain things that are much more difficult. But a common characteristic of ADHD is executive function weakness. So that's a very important thing for us to keep in mind if we're parenting a child who has ADHD. The way that I like to think about the brain is that we have two functions in our brain. We have knowledge, what we put into our brain, and then we have performance, how we actualize that knowledge at any given moment. What we know about ADHD is that it interferes with the usage of knowledge at the point of performance. So I'm going to give you an example to illustrate what this means. At our school, we have a little boy who went out on the playground. And before they went out to play, he was very excited about going out to play, really looking forward to it. Got out there, was having a great time. And then one of his classmates did something that was unpredictable, so challenged his mental flexibility, right? He didn't expect, and he didn't like it. So he hit him. So, of course, his teacher pulls him aside and says, "Hey, we don't hit. Let's talk about other ways we can solve our problems." They talked it through. He felt terrible. He was crying. He was genuinely sorry that he had hit this other child. So then the next day, right before they went out on the playground, the teacher says to him, "Okay, so we're going out on the playground. So what are you going to do if somebody upsets you?" "I won't hit them." "Okay, what are your other options?" They talked it through. You can go get the teacher. You can use your words, etc. They get out on the playground. He's super happy. Everything's going well. Somebody does something that upsets him, and he hits them, right? So what's going on there? Is he purposely ignoring what he learned the day before? Is he being purposely defiant or oppositional? Most of the time, especially with an ADHD child, he's absolutely acting in the moment. Something comes at him that he didn't expect, that feels bad, that feels uncomfortable, and he isn't able to inhibit his reaction quickly enough. He's not able to activate the knowledge about what he's supposed to do, about what his choices are, that lives here in the back of his brain. He's not able to stop, think, oh, yeah, I have some choices, right? And then use that knowledge to inform his performance. Instead, he just acts, right? Which is the ADHD. It's interfering with his ability to stop and reflect. And so that disconnect between knowledge and performance is what we really want to think about when we're structuring our homes to support kids with their executive functioning skills. So, when a child has weak executive functioning skills, they know what to do. They just don't know when to do it, right? Or they're just not able to do it when they need to. They know how they're supposed to do things often, but doing it that way at the moment that they need to is where they have their difficulty. So, the key is we need to think of our homes almost as what Russell Barkley calls a prosthetic environment. So, basically, he compares it to a medical model and he says, if we think of a prosthetic device, it's supporting the individual, right? It's helping the individual reach their potential. Well, the same is true for our homes. We can set up our homes in a way that support our children in developing their executive functioning skills, or we can set them up in ways that actually inadvertently, not intentionally, are making it more difficult for our children to self-regulate. So here we go. What are some concrete strategies you can try at home? All right, the first thing we should talk about is communication styles. Oftentimes, as parents, we are extremely language reliant. So, what that means is that we rely heavily on language to communicate with our children. What we know about most children, not just kids who have ADHD or other learning differences, is that language is often hard for them to process, especially if there's a lot of it. And if they're emotional and you throw language in, oftentimes that kind of breaks them. There's a breakdown that occurs where they're not really functioning in the logical side of their brain, right? And so we're saying, you should calm down. Let's talk about how to calm down. Let's work this through. Let's talk about what went wrong, blah, 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 right? And they're hearing like the Charlie Brown teacher, wah, 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 wah. They really aren't processing the language that we're throwing at them. So one of our sort of mantras at May Center is stop talking. In fact, I even have little business cards that say stop talking. Because even as teachers, we have to remind ourselves that we rely so heavily on language, and we need to do our best to talk less and show more. So I invite you to think about a routine that you might have with your child. If you're asking your child to do a chore, for example, maybe their job is to take out the trash. I know my instinct would be to say to my child, I expect you to take out the trash, and here's what time I expect you to take it out, and you got to tie it up, and then you need to take it out and make sure you actually open up the trash bin and put it all the way in. Just don't leave it sitting outside. And then when you're done, you need to close that lid back down and come on back inside. Right? So maybe my child heard the first 10 seconds of that, but after that, his working memory wasn't tracking it. And so it became a lot of wah, 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 right? So instead, actually physically walking through the task with my child might be a great way to go. And recognizing that I might have to do that 5 or 6 times before I'm going to send him out to do it on his own. And then even after that, one strategy that we use here a lot at school is to actually take pictures of what done looks like. So what that means is if I want my child to put the trash bag in the trash can and close the lid, then I'm going to take a picture of putting the trash bag in there, and then I'm going to take a picture of the lid closed. because that is helping him see visually what done looks like rather than a bunch of language, which forces him to have to make his own visualization of what done looks like. So I'm going to create that visualization for him through the pictures. So you can do that for all kinds of things in your home. I've seen people use it for what does done look like? How do I know when I'm ready to get in the car in the morning for school? So they take a picture of their child with their backpack on, with their shoes on their feet. We had one family that it was challenging for their daughter to get into the car with the shoes on. Sometimes she would get to school and there would be no shoes on her feet. Oh my goodness, how can it be? So for them, it was taking a picture of the shoes on the feet and posting that right by the front door. So that every single morning as you're getting ready to leave, you're going to check that visual checklist. Oh, before you get in that car, please look at the checklist. And what we like to do is even laminate the picture or put it in a plastic sleeve. And then with a whiteboard marker, have your child circle what we call the key features. So these are the defining elements of being ready, right? In this case, ready to go to school. So they might circle both shoes on the feet. They might circle the backpack. They might circle a lunchbox, a jacket, anything else that you're trying to sort of develop a new routine around. So pictures are really helpful. A picture of what a clean room looks like. Oftentimes we say, go clean your room, but if my child's not visualizing what a clean room looks like, their idea of clean and my idea of clean might be very different. So I might need to take a picture of the books straight on the bookshelf, or the bed made, right? Or no pile of clothes in the corner. So a clean pile of clothes and the clothes hung up or put in the drawers. Visual reminders that will help my child be successful at those tasks. Now we'll talk a little bit about homework. And I know right now, especially, we're in a very different era in that many of our children were learning from home, and maybe some of your kids are still learning from home. That presents a whole new set of challenges, both for your child who has to negotiate a space that they normally think of as a leisure space, right? Their home is usually a place where they go to relax. So whether we're talking about completing homework or whether we're talking about actually having to attend remote learning, that's a whole new ballgame. So the first thing is we really want to create in our home a space that is exclusive to that learning activity. So whether it's homework or remote learning, we recommend really setting up a workstation for your child where all they're really going to do at that workstation is work. We've had a lot of experience with remote learning. If you listened to Stephanie and Heidi earlier, I'm sure they shared some of this. But what we found is that some kids attend remote class laying in their beds. And what we always want them to understand is that if you're laying in your bed, you're telling your body it's time to rest. And we want you to be telling your body and your brain that it's time to be focused, right, and learning. So when we're sitting up, we call it listening learning position. When we're sitting up with our feet on the floor, with our eyes forward, paying attention to the teacher or to the work that we're doing, we're sending our brains the message that it's time to be awake. So that's the first thing, listening learning position. You can use that for the dinner table, right? Might want to call it something a little different, listening eating position maybe. But if you have a kiddo who's pretty squirmy at the dinner table or gets up and runs around a lot while they're eating and you want to encourage them to sit and chat while they eat, that would be a great way to do it, is practicing listening eating position. We have often found that a child's bedroom is not the most ideal place for learning. Now, there are plenty of kids who would disagree with me on this, and I actually think that some of them are right. Because as we know, everybody's different. And so what works for one person may not work for another. But what we have seen and what research supports is that, again, the bedroom is oftentimes thought of for a child as a leisure space, right? As a place where they can hang out, they can, play, they can rest, they can sleep. And so if you throw in even a beautiful desk in that bedroom space, oftentimes it's difficult for a child to focus, especially if there's toys that they love in that space with them, right? Real hard to focus on completing a paragraph when you've got a bucket of Legos sitting next to you. Um, Another thing is we want to try to help our students come up with a system for how to organize their materials. So at May Center, we use a lot of color coding, and some of that can be replicated at home. So you could create different spaces for different things. So what I like to do, for example, is use the colors green, yellow, and red. So yellow would be get ready. So on a desk, you could put a yellow, just a little yellow square sticker or circular sticker on the place on the desk where you would like your child to put the materials that they will need for remote learning that day or to complete their homework. And at our school, we would make a rule that says, I would like you to gather the materials. When you think you have them all, let me know, and I'll just check to make sure you have them all. Because part of what we want to try to avoid is that push pull tug of war that can happen for us as parents, where we mean well and we want to help our kids, but oftentimes we end up kind of in a tug of war or a power struggle with them about everything, or we end up over directing them, right? Kind of doing things for them more than we really want to in the interest of getting it done, right? There's a very practical reason for it. But in the long run, it might not be supporting your child's growth in developing those executive functioning skills themselves. So get ready. We're going to do your reading homework. So I need you to get your stuff together, put it down on the table, and then let me know, and I'll come and check. And that way, when you check, if they've missed something, you could simply say, oh, I notice you're missing your notebook, right? Rather than a big back and forth about it. Then when they're ready to begin, green means go. So maybe there's a little green dot right there on the table. They can move their things from get ready, okay, you're ready to start, move them to go. Work on it. When you think your work is done, put it on the red circle. So the red circle, which is stop, would be the done place. So that would be a way to indicate, okay, I think I'm done. And then, and only then, it's an invitation for the parent to come and check the work. Because oftentimes what we get from our kids is a lot of, if they're trying to do something and we see they're not doing it exactly right and we try to help, we oftentimes get a lot of, I'm doing it, right? Kind of pushing you away. Well, they're doing that because they want to build that independence. And that's actually something that we want to encourage. So I really like the done square as a way to encourage that independence. But then the rule is that they have to be open once they think they're done. If you say, oh, I noticed you forgot the third direction, go back and look at that again, right? Then they need to listen to you and follow through on that. But they've had the opportunity to do it themselves and be as independent as possible first. All right, just checking to see if I had any questions. I don't see any. All right. Um, so now we'll talk a little bit about strategies for promoting self-regulation. And oftentimes, this is going to take the form in our homes of kids having a meltdown if they don't get what they want, right? So oftentimes, even older children who have ADHD or other learning differences might really have a larger reaction than what we would expect given their age when something doesn't go their way, when they don't get what they want, or when they're frustrated by something that they know or think they know that they should be able to do and they can't. One thing to always remember when parenting a child who has a learning difference is that they have really dramatic asynchronous development. What that means is that in some areas, they're actually more advanced than their peers, and in other areas, they're much less advanced than their peers. So these are kids who are smart enough to know that they should be able to do some of the things that they see their friends doing, but they often don't have the skills developed yet, the executive functioning skills, or sometimes the fine motor skills or the gross motor skills to achieve those things. And so there's nothing more frustrating than thinking you should be able to do it and not be able to do it. I see a question in the chat from Sylvia Lamar. Hi, Sylvia. So Sylvia asks, are there workbooks you recommend for children and for adults with executive functioning challenges? I do. I'm going to write it in the comments for you. A book that I love is called Smart but Scattered. And that's a book that is not a workbook per se, but it's a wonderful, really user-friendly book that has a lot of practical exercises and suggestions, especially for children, but it goes all the way through adults. Because what you will find is that we don't outgrow these things, right? We learn to cope and we learn to develop strategies that support us, and we get older and our brains continue to develop. But especially people with ADHD are always going to struggle with executive functioning skills. These are always going to be things that are challenging for them. Doesn't mean that they can't do well and be successful in those areas, but it means they have to sort of learn how to create an environment that supports them themselves, right? So as adults get older, they can create that environment for themselves. When kids are younger, they need their parents and teachers to do it for them. Um, so here's something. A lot of the kids that we see at our school, um, because they haven't felt successful in other school environments, they tend to have a lot of negative self-talk. So what I mean by that is, they kind of always see the glass as half empty. They'll tend to think to take a more negative route towards things, or say like, oh, I'll never be good at this, right? Even if they've just been trying it, brand new skill for a few minutes. So what we know that kids with learning differences need is a ton of positive reinforcement. As parents, it's critical that we catch them and that we point out what our kids are doing right. And that can be hard as a parent. Oftentimes we're very busy in our homes. We're getting a million things done, especially now where we've had our kids around a lot more in the last few months than we typically do when we're all at work and school. And so there tends to be, we can easily fall into a rut of pointing out what they're not doing right and not pointing out what they are doing right. In fact, what we know is if we want to change behavior, especially with a child with a learning difference, research has demonstrated we need 4 positives to every 1 negative. So I'm not suggesting that you keep a tally, but maybe that wouldn't be a terrible idea. But really what you just want to do is try your best to raise your consciousness around really recognizing sincerely when your child is doing something that you ask them to do, when they are self-regulating, right? Because if they're self-regulating, we're not likely to really draw a lot of attention to them, right? Because they're doing their thing, we're doing our thing. It's wonderful and peaceful. But actually just giving them even a little nonverbal cue that tells them that you recognize that they're doing something well. And so at our school, oftentimes we use checks for that. We have a little sticky note right next to a child's workstation so that we can just quietly go up to them. We don't even have to say anything and just put a little check on their sticky. And they know that when they get the check, it means, I see you. I know you're doing something good. You're focused. You're working hard. In your home, you could develop a nonverbal signal. Maybe it's a thumbs up, maybe it's some other little signal. But oftentimes those nonverbals, again, removing the language and really just giving them that visual feedback is so key. Also, those kids who can be very negative in their self-talk, sometimes if you're too verbal in your praise, they'll actually reject it more. So you'll say, good job, and they'll say, I'm not doing good, I'm doing horrible. So I find that the nonverbal is a much nicer way to give them positive feedback, and most of the time you don't get as much of a pushback back, but they're taking in that positive, which is what we want. The other thing we want to keep in mind, especially for kids with executive functioning weakness, is that it's harder for them to wait for a reward than typical children. So, a typical child, maybe a sticker on a calendar each day of the week leading up to Friday, could work really well, right? Each day, ooh, I get my stickers, and if I get 5 stickers by Friday, I get a reward, right? What we know about kids who have executive functioning weakness, learning differences, is that after about a week of that, they're not likely to be motivated by that. And they need much more frequent positive reinforcement at the point of performance. So, right after they do the thing that we've been wanting them to do, that's when they need to get the reward. And then slowly, slowly over time, you can start to reward them at a little further interval, maybe waiting, first waiting till after dinner instead of getting the reward right during dinner when they don't blurt out or whatever we're trying to help them with. Maybe then we can wait till the evening, right? So just lengthening the time period over time, but knowing that it's going to take a lot more repetitions of that positive behavior, a lot more practice before the child is going to reach what we call automaticity, become automatic with that behavior, much more so in kids with learning differences than more typically developing kids. So that's real important because it can cause a lot of frustration when we're using a reward system and it doesn't seem to be working. One other thing that we really find helpful here that I've found is real easy to replicate at home is using a visual schedule. So again, going back to the fact that for most kids with learning differences, too much language isn't processed anyway. Creating a visual schedule or a visual checklist where the child sees visually pictures of each task that they're going to complete is very useful. We use what's called a work strip here, which actually has cards that we put on a ribbon. And these cards are laminated and they have a picture that represents each work. But I've seen parents do this for brushing your teeth. So they have a little work ribbon where they have, each step that they need to do to complete brushing their teeth in a picture. And the child can move that picture down the ribbon as they complete each task. Or you can just post a visual piece of paper with the pictures. But again, the key is less language and more visuals. So sometimes I've seen even parents of older children think, oh, well, my child can read, so I'm just going to do a language-based checklist. Even then, oftentimes that child is going to be less likely to process all of that language. And they just might see it more of like a glob. Or one child, I heard from a parent, they'd put a written checklist in the bathroom for showering and getting ready in the morning. And the child was in there for like 2 weeks. And one day the mom came in and said, hey, you need to get going on this. And the daughter said, she was pointing to it, the daughter said, what is that? I've never seen that before. And mom goes, I told you all about it. It's your checklist. She goes, oh, I just thought you put that up there for some other reason. I had no idea. She never even read it. So the visuals are much more likely to be effective and really draw them in. The last thing I'll bring up, and then I'll take any questions that anyone has, is some strategies for helping your child develop a little more intelligence around their feelings. I think even a lot of us as adults have a hard time expressing how we feel through language. And for children, they really do oftentimes struggle with that. And then if a child has any kind of expressive language issues, right, if they're delayed in their expressive language, it becomes all the more difficult to say how you're feeling. And when you can't say how you feel, you're much more likely to act out how you feel. So whether that takes the form of a tantrum or crying or lashing out at someone else, those are all manifestations of a child feeling frustrated about not being able to express how they feel. And of course, we know that once a child becomes real elevated in their emotional reaction, all the reasoning and talking in the world isn't going to help them, right? Once they kind of cross over that threshold. So our goal is to talk about feelings when we're not triggered, when we're not in a reaction. To help our kids start to identify how other people feel. So here at May Center, we spend a lot of time, even with older children, looking at people's faces, pictures of people's faces. How do you think that person feels? You'd be surprised how many kids I've heard say, I don't know, I'm not them. And so we really have to break down for them. Well, let's look at their face. Are they smiling? Are they frowning, right? Do they have tears? What's worried look like or scared? So really becoming more literate around how to read other people's emotions. And then also modeling for them, talking about our feelings. So really being conscious of saying when you feel angry, I'm feeling angry right now, and I just need a few moments to calm down before we talk. Modeling that kind of behavior over time, not overnight, helps a child see that there is a way to use language that is supportive of emotional reaction. And so, as much as possible, the more that we model that, the more that over time that child will be able to identify how they feel. A nice bridge to that is using pictures, either of people's faces, or here at May Center, we use what's called the mood meter, which just has color. And the child can place their picture, on the color that they're feeling. So blue is low energy, sad. Yellow, green is kind of the sweet zone. So green is, I'm feeling a good amount of energy, not too high, not too low. Yellow is kind of like the danger zone. I might be starting to get anxious or a little too crazy, a little too excited. But it could also be I'm really happy. Yellow could be a great feeling. And then red is the danger zone. So red is I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm very worried or anxious. And at school, we encourage the kids to move their picture throughout the day. So if something happens that upsets them, they can move the picture to that place. Um, and you could do the same at home. And so even if they can't talk with you right now because they're upset, they can indicate to you how they're feeling with the picture. And then as a parent, you could simply reflect to them, I see that you're in the red. I see you're angry. I'm going to let you have some space. And when you're ready, you let me know and we can talk. So again, you're giving the control in that case to the child, right? In a situation that feels very out of control. So of course, just because they're upset, they can't be throwing things or hurting other people or any of that. But you are giving them permission to feel that feeling, which oftentimes is real important for kids with learning differences because they'll develop bad feelings around having feelings if they aren't able to express themselves appropriately. And we don't want them to do that. We want them to know that feelings are a part of life and we can express them in ways that are helpful. All right, I'm going to stop there. So if anyone else would like to ask a question, I'm going to just pause for a moment and invite you to do that. All right, I don't think there are any questions. So I will wrap up by saying we are so very grateful to everyone who has given to our Open Door Fund. The Open Door Fund is designed to support our tuition assistance program. And as I'm sure you're aware, this year more than ever, we have had an overwhelming requests for financial aid. We would really like to give as many kids the opportunity to come to school here as we can. In addition, we will continue to do our outreach work where we go into Santa Fe public schools. That work is funded through donations and grants. So we really appreciate the opportunity to do this work. It is life-saving work and it's also the most rewarding work that we'll ever get to do. So we're grateful for it. We thank you for your support. And if you haven't given already, I would invite you to check out our Open Door Fund. Between now and 3 o'clock tomorrow, all of our donations are tripled. Thank you.